Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's session of the Agriculture Summit, for the virtual summit, I should say, across the 3rd District. We're grateful that you joined us. As we live with the pandemic right now, we know that the challenges are many, and actually Congress has taken historic steps with the administration to help producers, help consumers, a lot of folks all across the country. We know that agriculture faces unique challenges, certainly from other parts of the country, and unlike other industries, we know that agriculture is hands-on work and cannot be done remotely. And so I'm grateful, though, that we've had producers really step up. The entire agriculture industry has stepped up, and the complications that we know and the challenges that are out there, they've been met. And I'm grateful to say that consumers, there have been a few bumps along the way, but consumers have been able to access food at their grocery stores, and ultimately nutrition has been strong across the country. With us today, we have 2 special guests, and to update us on what USDA has been working on, namely the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP, and the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, and how that can help farmers and ranchers across the 3rd District, as well as answer any questions that you might have. Administrator Richard Fordyce has been the Farm Service Agency Administrator at USDA since May of 2018. He is a 4th-generation farmer from Bethany, Missouri, and previously served as the State Executive Director for FSA and the Director of the Missouri Department of Agriculture. Also with us is Undersecretary Greg Ibach. He's been the Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs since October of 2017. The MRA includes the Agriculture Marketing Service Agency and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service Agency. As many of you know, Greg is one of our own, and before serving in his current role, he served as Nebraska's Director of Agriculture. Administrator Fordyce, thank you for joining us today. Last time you joined us, the USDA was still in the rulemaking process for the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, and now that it is up and running, and conversations are in the works for the next steps beyond CFAP, I was just wondering if you could give us an update of where things stand right now.
I'm glad to do that. Thank you, Congressman. So good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here with the Congressman and with the Undersecretary to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. Maybe visit real quickly about the status of our offices across Nebraska and other topics that might come up. So let me start with the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. That's the program that was stood up primarily at the beginning because of the funding that was provided to the department through the CARES Act, $9.5 billion through the CARES Act, and our Secretary Perdue, wanted to leverage those dollars with additional dollars to provide additional support. So $6.5 billion also came from the Commodity Credit Corporation. So brought the total amount of support to support agriculture because of the pandemic to $16 billion. The original rollout, sign up began on May 26th. The original rollout had several categories: livestock, dairy, non-specialty crops, and specialty crops. And I know there's been, in the news anyway, there's been a couple of announcements since that original sign up of additional commodities. And I thought I might just explain real quickly about how that came about. The Secretary and the President were very adamant that we roll this out as quickly as possible. And we had access to data to be able to list some commodities originally that we had really strong data and understood the impact to those markets based on the impacts of coronavirus. So those were the original commodities announced. We knew at the time that there would be added commodities, added crops, and so we asked the public to help us in gathering some of that information. And so we issued what we call a NOFA to ask the public to submit information and data that could support additional eligible commodities. And so since that time, we've had 2 announcements adding a number of commodities, a lot of those specialty crop commodities, but there are others that have been added since that time. A couple of weeks ago, we made an announcement that of the added commodities, and that the deadline would be extended to September 11th. And then also, if you remember, we factored those eligible payments at 80%. During that announcement, we also made the decision to go ahead and pay the remaining 20%. So if you're a producer, you already have filed an application, you have gotten a payment, you don't need to do anything. The additional 20% of those payments, actually those payments were processed last weekend and were sent to county offices on Monday for them to do more of a procedural thing, just to put eyes on again and make sure that everything was good, and those payments then will be issued maybe today. Congressman, could be started going to producers today, and certainly I would think a lot of those payments will be out by the end of the week. So that's good news. Nebraska has been very active and very involved in the CFAP program. Nebraska's state executive director, Nancy Johnner, sent me some numbers earlier this week. As of Monday, Nebraska had 29,304 applications worth $508 million. Almost 60% of those payments were for livestock, $303 million, followed by non-specialty, which probably primarily here in Nebraska, corn and soybeans, 38%, $196 million, and then dairy with $8 million. There were a few specialty crop applications for just about $500,000. So some of the added commodities in the most recent announcement, sheep, we had sheep, yearling sheep, that were in the CFAP program. Now we're including all classes of sheep, so that could have some impact in some areas here in Nebraska. And then the addition of liquefied and frozen eggs, that you don't know how that'll work here, depending on how the egg production or the egg breaking facilities in parts of Nebraska, how that'll impact that. So that's kind of a real quick overview of CFAP. Obviously, the Farm Service Agency, one of our primary functions is acreage reporting. That's an annual event, and in some cases, depending on what you grow, you do it more than once. And we have had some changes in how our offices are delivering the customer service that you expect from the Farm Service Agency. Right after the coronavirus really hit its peak, we asked our folks to work from home, to telework, and our agency really had not been equipped to telework. As you all know, it is a personal relationship over the counter. And so we had to adjust very quickly, get our employees some equipment maybe that they didn't have, where there was connectivity issues, get hotspots and other technology to them to be able to work, and they did. And we've got the numbers to prove it here in Nebraska and across the country. Our employees really met the challenge and were able to really deliver programs, Congressman, that are impactful to producers and keep that going. Maybe not quite at the pace that we would have had we been in those offices personally, but I think our folks did a really good job, and acreage reporting is moving along really well here in Nebraska. Some counties that maybe were falling a little behind, we were able to mobilize some jump teams to go help some of those counties to get that finished up. From a CRP standpoint, in our general sign-up, Nebraska added 132,000 acres to CRP in the general sign-up, and the most recent CRP grasslands enrollment, 209,000 acres were added to CRP. So a lot of activity around CRP. Wanted to mention real quickly a change that we announced that I think everyone is going to be very happy about, and that is the process by which emergency haying and grazing of CRP is triggered. Previously, as if you've ever done it, you know how this worked. You went to your county office, or your county committee said, hey, we're experiencing at least 40% loss in forage. We've been in drought. We've been in D2 drought. We need to give producers access to CRP for haying and grazing. So the county would make a request to the state state would a lot of times bundle those, wait for multiple counties to come in, send those to headquarters, so send them to Washington, D.C., and then get final approval there. And in some cases, maybe it would take a week or two, or maybe even longer, to get the clearance to go ahead and access that CRP. But we know if you're in a drought or your excessive dry period, every day makes a difference on the quality of that forage. So thanks to the congressman and his colleagues in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was language added that allowed for the Farm Service Agency to streamline that process. And so how it works today is if your county has experienced D2 drought for 1 week, that your county automatically triggers. There is nothing that needs to happen. That county automatically has access to that CRP for emergency haying and grazing. Another, I think, really good component of that is and it all revolves around the primary nesting season, as we know, and Nebraska, I think the entire state of Nebraska is July 15th. So anytime in an 8-week period prior to that primary nesting season expiring, if your county had experienced D2 drought for 1 week, the day after the primary nesting season is over, your county is triggered for emergency haying and grazing. So this has really streamlined the process. And and as I said earlier, when you're in need of that forage, you literally could get on it the day after the end of the primary nesting season. So, certainly if you're in that case, and I know Nebraska has some drought affected counties, I would encourage you to contact your Farm Service Agency office. You're going to have to let them know that you're going to access that forage, and there's some provisions that you need to know about that they can fill you in on. But really a streamlined process to get there. I know that was at times, I know here in Nebraska, because I know it was the case in Missouri, at times it was a very frustrating process over the years in the past. So a great improvement. So thanks to Congress and the work that they did through the 2018 Farm Bill to be able to allow that to happen. I think, I'll just mention real quickly, I mentioned earlier about the status of our offices. Every county, so we have phases, and we do this very carefully, and we rely on what's going on actually in the county. It's not something that happens from Lincoln. It's not something that happens from Washington. It's data that we get from the local county as far as how do we move forward with opening offices. So every office in Nebraska is phase 1, which means the employees are back. They may not be accepting farmers and ranchers into the office yet. And Nancy said there are, most of the counties are now in phase 2, which means employees are back and they're taking customers by appointment only. So that's a big step forward for the agency as to where we were earlier in the pandemic. So anyway, I just want to say thanks to all of you for your patience as we've worked through a lot of programs, a lot of things that need to be done, a lot of things that you need to get done. Your patience that you've exhibited working with our staff and our county offices, and certainly want to say a huge thanks to our staff that are in those local county offices that do a great job every day representing Nebraska agriculture and the farmers and ranchers in their individual counties. When I travel, I hear from employees, whether they've been there a year, 5 years, or in some cases 35 years, that they refer to the producers in their county as their producers. So there's a great deal of passion, certainly support for agriculture from our staff, and just want to say a huge thanks to them and the effort that they're putting out. So, Congressman, I think maybe that's enough for now.
Well, thank you. I know you've been busy, and I think what you mentioned, though, in streamlining and making it easier for producers themselves, I think there's quite a theme across the administration in that respect. And so thank you for helping implement that. I think producers are very grateful as well. His title is Undersecretary, but I know most folks watching know you as Greg, so we'll just call you Greg. What would you like to add?
No, that's wonderful, and it's great to be back here in Nebraska and join the congressman today. We got to have supper at the ranch last night and enjoy each other's company, and so that was a great opportunity. Richard has done some incredible things, and the Farm Service Agency has done some incredible things here over the last few years of the Trump administration. I think, Richard, that at the end of this CFAP payment period, you will have pushed out almost $50 billion to America's farmers and ranchers on behalf of the Trump administration, between trade mitigation and disaster programs, and maybe even close to 60 billion.
It's getting close to 60.
It's that's pretty incredible what the president has made available through USDA and the secretary has implemented to be able to support farmers and ranchers in their time of need as we've struggled the last few years. With CFAP or with COVID rearing up and everything shutting down in March, there were some real struggles. And obviously at MRP, where I have the Ag Marketing Service, which is in charge of most of the grading programs across agriculture, whether they be specialty crops or grains or livestock, as well as on the animal and health and plant protection side of the house with APHIS. Over half the employees in my mission area, which is total employees of about 13,000 people, have been deemed essential personnel, and so they've worked right through this. And many of them worked in very high danger zones with a lot of infections that were being reported, whether they be in packing plants or in New York City at fruit and vegetable marketplaces and distribution centers where they were grading, or at the border where goods were coming across the border that needed to be inspected to make sure they didn't have any pests or diseases coming in. So we're very proud of those employees at USDA that worked right through, and we were very lucky in that we have still had a very low percentage of our employees in my mission area that have contracted COVID, and we have not had any deaths from COVID in my mission area. So we have been very fortunate there. And I think it's a testament to the way they handled themselves, the way that we were able to get personal protective equipment to them, and the way they went about doing their jobs in a way that allowed them to be safe. At the same time, the other half of the employees had to adjust to working from home and working remotely. And incredibly proud of the job they did as well. During this time, we were pushing through and finalizing a whole bunch of regulations that allowed us to update the plant biotechnology regulations. For the first time in 30 years, we were able to finalize those regulations in the middle of COVID. We've proposed and are moving through different phases of the regulatory process and updating protections and the organic industry that will hold foreign companies and growers accountable to the U.S. standard, as well as make sure that we have the protocols and protections in place to make sure that our own producers are adhering to our standards, and that there is fairness across the board for those producers that we are having more and more of in Nebraska every day that are growing crops organically. We also have worked very hard to do some things that will be new. We have conversations ongoing with FDA to look how we can work together to provide opportunities for animal biotechnology to move forward with a regulatory process that has certainty. In Nebraska alone, our livestock industry could really benefit from being able to advance disease resistance, be able to eliminate horns through genetic alterations that don't do anything but change just those one or two genes that we're looking to change. And they're things that we want to regulate that can be done in nature through a breeding process that might take multiple generations and maybe as long as 10 years. We can do them pretty much overnight with gene editing and have the same result exactly that we would through a breeding process. If you examine the DNA, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So we think there's some great opportunities there. The Secretary earlier in the administration also worked with FDA to make sure that as we looked at cell-based meat technology, that we divided up that responsibility. So cell-based meat is the technology to grow that meat in the laboratory is under FDA's jurisdiction, but the minute that cell-based laboratory meat would be harvested, if you will, and made available to consumers, that comes under USDA's jurisdiction. And the Secretary has made clear that under USDA's jurisdiction, consumers will be able to know at the meat counter the difference between that meat that is produced in the laboratory and that meat that is produced by America's ranchers and farmers across our nation. And so we think that's an important distinction, and we know it's an important distinction for Nebraska producers. What we're really here is not only to do this listening session, or I think you have a fancier name for it than that, but we're also here in Kearney to look at one of the things that AMS is doing to help address the hunger needs that were across our nation during COVID. As we know, as restaurants and food service shut down, many of our farmers and ranchers lost their market. We saw milk being wasted and not having a processor to go to because the supply chain had stopped when companies lost the ability to be able to be open, and restaurants weren't operating and conventions got canceled. And so while we still needed the food at the retail level, we had to go through a process where we transitioned all those food products that were headed for food service and restaurants into packaging and label packages and to be able to be at retail. So we had that hiccup in the process. At the same time, many of our specialty crop producers in the south of the United States and the West Coast in California were destroying some of their crops because they couldn't get to the marketplace. AMS saw that need. We also saw that the newly unemployed were having troubles feeding their families. And we worked with the Secretary to quickly react and develop a food box program. And one of our great Nebraska companies, Cashway, is participating in that food box program. And we will tour Cashway here in Kearney later today with the congressman to be able to see how they're constructing those boxes of food that are being distributed not only in Nebraska out of Cashway here in Kearney, but also to North and South Dakota. And so we're very proud of the job that Cashway is doing to help farmers and ranchers take that food that was going to waste, be able to create demand for it, and now get it to hungry people across our nation. As of earlier this month, we had distributed over 60 million boxes of food to America's hungry families. And we're going to, before it's over, have distributed $3 billion worth of food as well. And that's everything from fruits and vegetables, dairy products, milk, as well as meat. And that includes pre-cooked chicken, pork, beef, and turkey products that are eligible to be included in those boxes. So it's a great opportunity to let people have access to some great products that farmers and ranchers grow, to become, in some cases, familiar with products that they didn't normally use in their homes. And we hope down the road that as people have become accustomed to cooking at home, that when they go to the grocery store, they will be customers for those great products they've been seeing in the box. So with that, look forward to your questions. Again, I can't tell you how great it is to be able to be back here in Nebraska. This past week, we celebrated a milestone for our family, the arrival of Teresa and I's first grandchild. Ibach was born on 8/8, and so we're excited. I'm excited to be able to be here and get a chance to get to know her as well. So thank you, everybody, for listening in this morning.
So it's not just Undersecretary, it's Grandpa Greg now too.
Grandpa Greg.
There we go. I do want to introduce to everyone participating, Katie Morley. Katie is on my Washington staff handling agriculture and trade issues and some other issues. And also here in the room today, Eric Kamler from the Grand Island office, many of you know, as well as Baljan Santee from the Scotts Bluff office. So we're all spread out here in the room just to be sure, but appreciate everyone's participation here today. And Katie is going to moderate here and mention the questions that the viewers and participants have submitted. Katie, do you want to fire off the first question?
Perfect. Yeah, as the Congressman mentioned, if you all have any questions, feel free to put in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and I will happily ask them for the panelists. So we have one question so far. The first one is clarification question. Why does the USDA use the term meat when referring to cell-based protein?
That's a good question, and that is one of the things that the Secretary is working on, and with the labeling scheme that we will have when cell-based protein becomes available to consumers, it will have a label on it that will clarify that for consumers, so there's no confusion on whether it was raised by a farmer or rancher here in Nebraska or raised in the lab.
Maybe we can even engage advocates who appreciate natural products to support natural meat instead of fake meat. Any other questions yet?
Yes. A CFAP question for y'all. Is alfalfa eligible for the coronavirus relief program?
So alfalfa is not eligible for CFAP payments at this time. You know, again, as I mentioned, the first announcement when we announced the program and had the initial signups and went through the process of soliciting input from the public and the data that supported either a price loss or a disruption in the supply chain. Looking at the numbers for alfalfa or other hay products didn't support inclusion into the CFAP program. You know, we continue to look at that data. We continue to look at what is the effect of coronavirus on commodities moving forward. But at this time, alfalfa is not included in the coronavirus food assistance program.
USDA went through a pretty extensive process to be able to not only determine in that first round, as Administrator Fordyce talked about, what would be eligible that we were able to determine, but we also made available a NOFA period of time when most of the commodities across America were able to take a look at their market and their price history, and either as a individual group of producer or as a national commodity, then those NOFAs were completed. So all commodities had an equal chance to be able to submit their data and establish whether or not they had a sufficient loss. I think 5% was required to meet the minimum threshold in price to be able to be eligible. So I think it's not necessarily all USDA's decision anymore, because we were able to work with many industries to analyze the data that they provided to be able to establish their eligibility as well.
And I would just say, kind of to the Undersecretary's point, when we asked the public to submit data for inclusion in the CFAP program, we got, as you can imagine, we got all kinds of different data sets. So some very, very complete, some not as complete, some maybe just merely a statement saying, I think you should include whatever in the CFAP program. And so what we did, and you know, Greg mentioned that AMS is in his mission area. So it was more than FSA. It was FSA. We worked very closely with AMS. We worked very closely with the Office of the Chief Economist. And we split these submissions up into teams that work specifically in certain categories. And if they looked at that submission and there were additional questions, or they had additional questions, we reached out to the submitter and had them clarify, and help explain what the data meant. So it was way more than just getting a submission in from the public and, going down through a paper and saying, no, that doesn't work. We actually had personal dialogue and visited with folks for them to further explain what the data meant. So I think it was a very good process. But again, we continue to look at those impacts and as we look at what the impact is going forward.
USDA tried to make as many commodities as we could justify eligible to be part of CFAP. We have a responsibility to the taxpayer as well as to Adrian and the rest of Congress to make sure that we can justify those actions that we take. But we did approach it with the bias that we wanted to provide aid and assistance.
Next question.
All right. Administrator Fordyce, what has been the biggest hurdle with CFAP for producers?
Well, that is a great question, and Greg knows this because he was in on some of the conversations early on. What we wanted to do was certainly because of workload in our county offices, the status that a lot of our county offices were working in at the time, we wanted to make this as straightforward and as uncomplex, is that a word? Uncomplicated as we could possibly make it. And so depending on the category that the producer applies in, it could be, if you're a dairy producer, it could be, first quarter production. You're going to need to know what that is. If you're a livestock producer, some sales during a period of time, January 15th to April 15th, and then a number, an inventory number. If you're a non-specialty, so corn soybean producer here in Nebraska, know what your 19 production is, and then what you had after the first of the year, after January 1st, that wasn't already marketed. And it depends on the different categories, but we really tried to make it straightforward and easier for the producer, make it as easy as we possibly could. Now, if you're a diversified operation, depending on your records and access to those records, it could be a bit more of a challenge, on some farms or ranches than it would be in others. But we really tried, one of the paramount priorities was to make this, as simple as we could. So, from a hurdle standpoint, I'm just thinking, my wife is doing this for our farm now, and I know she had to scramble a little bit to come up with an inventory number. She had to, a couple of the guys that work for us, she had to work with them certainly to get an inventory number of cattle. But it's a producer self-certification, and I know maybe in some cases we've had some county offices that have been a little more aggressive and maybe asking for more. And so we've continually communicated to county offices that this is a producer self-certification. The producer is subject to a spot check, potentially a random spot check. And so if you put down 1,000 head of cattle in your inventory number, we're going to ask, if you get chosen for a spot check, we're going to ask you to provide some kind of documentation to support that number. But it should be pretty straightforward. Really, the only burden or hurdle that I can think of would be just being able to access those records and having an accurate count for the application.
Very good. Katie?
Great, thank you. All right, we have from Brett from South Dakota. So this is a multi-state webinar. We do need immediate relief as well as long-term fix. Along with this relief, is there a way to offer dollars off of either financing or tax credits for new structures for the farmer and rancher?
So, from a structure standpoint, the Farm Service Agency does have the Farm Storage Facility Loan Program, where we loan money to build a lot. Our list is quite extensive of the things that we will finance, but primarily what we think of in the farm storage facility loan program are grain bins and grain storage. There's also hay storage. A lot of kind of structures can be built under that farm storage facility loan program. The interest rates are really competitive, depending on the number of years that you want to finance that project. But that's a program that works really well. It's a pretty straightforward program. It runs through the program side of our house, not necessarily the loan side of the house. So there's no test for credit. You've got to have the assets to obviously support the loan, but it's a little different than our farm than the approach that we take on the farm loan side. Certainly the undersecretary may have better ideas about tax credits and those kind of things, but we certainly can participate in financing a lot of things on the farm, and that even extends to hopper bottom trailers, livestock trailers, trucks, a lot of things, grain carts, anything that you may need to store either for a short period of time or help move the product along through the value chain. We can help you with that.
And I will add, tax reform that we did not long ago, it's conducive on the expensing. Tax reform is very friendly to producers and those tax incentives that are out there. And let me say that other ideas, the producers have. We are on the Ways and Means Committee wanting to be mindful of how we can help through the tax code get the economy back on track. So ideas from producers, I would certainly be happy to hear those ideas, because we know even before COVID hit, a lot of statements were made that we shouldn't wait 30 years to reform the tax code when we see opportunities to grow our economy through the tax code.
And obviously the congressman is on one of the most powerful committees in House of Representatives, the Ways and Means Committee, and so they have broad jurisdiction to be able to do a number of things. But one of the things that the administration has been particularly focused on and under the president's leadership is to look at the regulatory burden that everybody has, but particularly for USDA, it's the regulatory burden that agriculture is under. And so we have a lot of the reforms that we've made to our regulations in the past 3.5 years have been to get rid of silly paperwork, to get rid of the time it takes to documentation for some of Richard's programs, for some of our programs, extra steps or inspections that are required that weren't necessary. We've really tried to provide relief that is real financial relief by taking that regulatory burden off of Americans.
Definitely, and not just in USDA, but across the federal government. And I think the economy being so strong before COVID, one of the reasons was that industry across America and consumers themselves were able to experience the efficiencies of better regulations, smarter regulations, and not just more regulations. It was much better applied. Katie, back to you.
All right. Next question. Based on current commodity prices, specifically with corn, is there any discussion of an MFP payment this fall?
So MFP would, we've kind of got that term in our head. That's really was a trade mitigation terminology, and so we're not probably considering that at this time, because we think that we have done a lot to straighten out a new trade agreement with NAFTA, with USMCA now. We've also made progress with China. We see China making some record purchases of corn, soybeans, and grain sorghum that are all important to Nebraska. But we do realize that the impact of COVID is not over. And so we are working right now at USDA to be able to utilize about $14 more $14 billion more dollars that Congress had made available to us just a few weeks ago to be able to roll out a second wave of CFAP payments. And we're getting in discussions about how we're going to roll those payments out, again, focused on being farmer and rancher friendly, ease of application and ease of administration for Richard and his employees in the Farm Service Agency. So I think as producers and agriculturalists, you can look forward or be watching for that announcement coming out sometime in probably the next 30 to 45 days about how we will be pumping $14 billion more into the ag economy.
And let me just add on the trade front, when you look at the magnitude of USMCA, that was done, of course, it went into full implementation on July 1st amidst a lot of other news too. But I want everyone to understand that USMCA got done despite a lot of naysayers saying it could never be done. And, you know, from the legislative standpoint of Congress being involved, the House under Democratic control, with the White House being Republican, I mean, all sorts of challenges, and we got this done. And naturally, I myself was a little bit nervous at first, representing agriculture that had done well under NAFTA. But the president and the administration in general saw opportunities to leverage our markets more effectively, more efficiently through negotiation. And I think America is better off with USMCA. Yeah, there were some points that I didn't really want in there, but you know what? It gave us probably the strongest passage of a trade agreement in Congress than we've ever seen. I mean, I have colleagues who have never voted for a trade agreement before, but they voted for this one, and I think it's teeing up more opportunities down the road. So, Katie.
All right, so we have one last question. I know that our time is coming to a close. And that question is, where do things stand with the EPA and dicamba approval? I know that that's also with, you know, another agency, but any information or things that you can share with us would be great.
So at APHIS, we work very closely with EPA on dicamba and other crop protection chemicals that are out there. Obviously, the decision by the court in California was a blow to agriculture at a very bad time. We worked very closely. I had several conversations myself with EPA officials about how they could try to allow farmers to utilize the genetics they had purchased, as well as the crop protection chemicals that they had purchased in this growing season. And I think EPA came up with a pretty good compromise to be able to allow producers not to be harmed. At the same time, we knew this fall that we would go through a relicensing or a relabeling approval for dicamba. And that process was in full gear. We have the companies that have those crop protection chemicals that are in that category of dicamba have submitted the data to EPA or are working on submitting the data to EPA. We have lots more research. We also have more stabilization, anti-drift qualities built into some of those products now. And so again, we're providing some guidance and some assistance to EPA, but ultimately the decision is theirs. But I'm very optimistic that EPA will be able to address the California courts, the ninth district questions and the basis for their ruling against dicamba in a new labeling process that will be able to allow producers access to that crop protection chemical in the future.
Well, maybe one more question, if we have one more question.
I think we are closing out, so.
All right. Well, again, thank you to our panel here today, Richard and Greg. I'm not only grateful that you're here today, but I'm grateful for your service across America. And we know that amidst the challenges, there are some good things happening. When you look at our farmers and ranchers and producers in general, their ability to help feed the world. We take that for granted. Not only feed America, but help feed the world. And we're helping people around the world because of that. Now we want to see some economic viability of agriculture production here at home as well. And so that's always on the top of my mind of how we can maintain, grow the ag economy. And amidst our challenges, though, we've got some great stories out there in terms of new ideas and innovation. Because I really believe that whether it's our national debt or whether it's a pandemic, the answer is innovation. We can innovate our way out of this. We will not be able to tax our way out of it, regulate our way out of it, or use the heavy hand of the federal government thinking that will lead the way into effective solutions. We can do far more, and we can do far better with innovation. And so thank you to all of our participants today. Tomorrow morning, we will be focusing on telecommunications, broadband. We'll hear from some experts there. And then on Friday, note the time change, on schedule change on Friday, we will have our Chief Ag Negotiator, Greg Dowd. Ambassador Dowd will be able to give us an update on trade. We know there's a lot happening, so it's pretty exciting. But I want to thank all of you for participating, and hopefully see you tomorrow and Friday. Thank you so much. God bless, and go Big Red.